I've been in the startup world for a number of years. And as investors,
Mhm.
when you go to seek investment, one of the things that you learn very quickly is they invest in people more than they actually do the business plan because the people are so important. I think that speaks volumes from the people that are investing millions and millions of dollars in businesses. They're investing in people. So, again, another proof point of what you're going to be talking about today, anecdotally, but through your studies and surveys and different things and methodology, I'm really interested to hear how you're connecting all of those dots. So I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about maybe introduce this concept of the science of HR to begin with.
Yeah. So if I think about just the employee experience, and maybe we'll start there. I think there is a narrative and it's anecdotal, and most people would, at face value, having a conversation, say, oh, of course, employees impact a customer experience. But when you really try to ask the question, well, do they and how? It's a little bit harder to figure that out. I've spent over the course of my career a lot of time in the engagement experience kind of space from a research perspective and just purely from an interest perspective. And I think for many years, most organizations just assumed, okay, if I have high engagement, we're going to have better business results. And while there's a correlation relationship that suggests that those two things are true, it lacks a lot of predictiveness. It really lacks, is this a direct impact or not? And so, whether it's Gartner or any other sort of organization, you tend to hear frequently, oh, the majority of people are disengaged, and the level of engagement's like a 32 to 38%, if you will. And so if we accept that as fact, if you will, then that means there's a lot to do. And a few years back, I really dived into the literature and the research around this topic of engagement, experience, work engagement, job engagement, all these different areas. And this is where the science of HR sort of comes into play, because had I not pursued advanced degrees in IO and business psychology, I wouldn't have approached it that way. And by that, what I mean is the scientific methodology of saying, I have a research question. I wonder, does experience actually impact said outcome? And how would I go about looking at that? So when you follow the scientific methodology, that sort of took me down that path. This is while I was still running a consulting practice and everything else. And so what we've been able to do is to really ask the question around employee experience. One, can you define it? Two, could you break it down into some measurable sort of approach? And then three, could you measure it? And when we think about defining it, that's one of the sort of the core issues with just engagement or any other survey for that matter, is having a universally accepted definition. Is this true, et cetera? So stripping all that away at its core, I started to ask people, hey, where do you work? I work here. What's your experience been like? And inevitably I would get, it's either really positive or it's not, or maybe somewhere in between. And then I would ask the next question, tell me about that. Why is it? And what I started to do is just record and write down what people told me. And what emerged over the course of a couple of years of just having this sort of conversation were these consistent elements about their experience. Things like who I work for, where I work, when I work, the resources I'm giving, tools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These became, in essence, the elements of their experience. And what was fascinating is as I was recording this and writing it down and logging it, I thought about the customer experience. And so I started to research that. Now, what's really interesting is in the customer experience, these are similarly, you could ask a customer, what was your experience today? Net promoter score or CSAT score. Oh, it was really positive. Why was it? And they'll tell you these things. And so that's really how customer experience has evolved. And it's identified these core mini experiences or interactions, better way to think about it. And in that situation, those interactions are identified as the keys to making the buying decision.